The following broadcast was produced by the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco as part of our Lighthouse Learning Library.
Well, now we have a little change of pace. Before I get started, anybody here a user of either Access News or Newsline? Okay. Well, the man I'm about to introduce had something to do with that. In 1995, a bunch of us sort of news junkies in withdrawal knew that there were some evolving systems by which you could get news on the telephone. And we needed to raise money to make that happen. And Tim Ford really was the spearhead of this effort. And sometime in January of 1995, we found ourselves in the office of the California State Librarian, the legendary Kevin Starr. And turns out that Kevin had all kinds of connections with blindness we didn't know at first. His father was blind in San Francisco, and Kevin was motivated to do something about it. And his effort led to some of the first seed money for that Newsline and Access News service. And later on, when we needed some more money, it was Tim Ford who said, who had no official title, no real anything that said he should go ahead and be the spear. He just went and did it. He found the Public Utilities Commission, had some money. He found the Publishers Association, gave support, all kinds of things. It's a long and it's a great story, but what it really shows is a sort of enterprise and entrepreneurial spirit that Tim has always had. If there's a problem in state government, it's not, like we were hearing before, it's not Tim's job to fix it, but somehow Tim always shows up, the guy to represent, in our case, the blind community and the spirit of reason and logic. Even today, when we've had some challenges with Department of General Services, Tim, who saw a problem and just went and fixed it, is in the lead of this as well. So Tim is currently Senior Staff Counsel with the California Department of Public Health, and that's his formal job. He has 1,000 other jobs before. And why we invited him here is to tell you where you're starting out. Maybe you're just out of school. Maybe you're just finishing school. Maybe you've been sitting at home for a while and thinking, gee, that counselor hasn't given me a job. I don't know any employers who are saying, gee, who's the next blind person I can hire? And so how do you make your luck? How do you push through where you're not supposed to be to find money for Newsline, to find a way to reform a whole purchasing system, to do all these things? There's something about going beyond your job description that's made Tim really a hero to many of us. So I'd like to hand the mic over now to Tim Ford.
Well, thank you. And that is off, so I'll use this one. Well, it's really great to be here, and trust me, after all the traffic jams and road construction that we hit, I really am glad to get here. So I'm going to talk about, other than, I suppose you'd call it the accepted method of getting a job. And mine could be titled either how to get a job without really trying, how to have fun and fall into a job, or why being able to hotwire a car can lead to employment. And there's actually a story that you're going to hear on that. So, just a quick background for me. Brian gave you a little bit of it. I'm actually close to retirement now, so 30 plus years with the state after law school. A few years before that, I actually was at the Hatland Center. Used to be called, there we go. Used to be called the Living Skills Center for the Blind, and I was a job developer. So I had the formal experiences and training. So we're going to talk about other than that. So why do we focus on the kind of the non-official ways of doing it? Well, because that's the way that things can just work sometimes. we spend a lot of time getting ready and planning, and it's all important to know about how to interview and how to write a resume and how to make those kind of contacts. But you probably talked about already, what are some of the things that people who make decisions about who to hire, what is it that they make their decisions on? So anybody, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Yeah, good fit, okay. Anybody else? Qualification, sure. Experience, yeah.
Are they solving a problem?
It's helping to solve, okay, yeah, problem solving, that's a good one.
Being a team player.
Team player, that's good.
Taking initiative, being able to see where something needs to be done and do it.
Absolutely. Enthusiasm?
Someone they like.
Knowing when to ask for help.
That's good too. So I'm going to go back to the hiring someone they like. And you all heard about how those decisions are made pretty quickly on a cold interview. So I'm going to talk about the totally different environment. And even though my presentation's entitled Be Your Own Job Developer, like I said, it's really being out and doing things that get you known. It can be church, it can be other social activities, clubs, it can be just anything you can think of, anything that's enjoyable to you, anything that's fun. And when you're in situations like that, unless it's solitary meditation, you interact with people. You get to know people. They get to know you. And what's the difference between that environment and someone getting to know you than an employment situation? Anybody? No pressure. Someone can get to know you in a myriad of ways without having to go through that awkward little thing where they're in an interview trying to decide if they like you or not. And all those other things are important as well. So part of what I've always done, just because I like to have fun, and is to just get out and do things. No plan, no ulterior motive, no great job search idea, just doing something because it sounded like a fun idea. Whitewater rafting happened to be one of those ideas. Yeah. And so I ended up on a whitewater rafting trip. And how I ended up on that trip is actually a story for maybe later tonight after a couple glasses of wine. But it goes back to Puerto Vallarta, Guadalajara, and a run-in with the Mexican legal system. And then fast forwarding to a river trip in Oregon where the state authorities were looking for me. And that'll all explain later why I ended up on this other trip. Because basically I got pulled off of a whitewater rafting trip midway through. And the people that were organizing the trip came up with later on, they had a trip, Friends of the River. And then in Environmental Traveling Companions, you folks have probably heard of them. Yeah. And actually it's a nice thing because where I live is right on the American River, right near where Etc. has their headquarters now. So I ended up on another trip that turned out to be kind of a thank you for Friends of the River of major donors, major benefactors, and other such influential people. That was not me. I was there because they felt sorry for what had happened on the other trip, and so they said, okay, well here, we'll let you go on this trip. I said, fine. So I leave Sacramento, hooked up with one of the participants on the trip, a gentleman in a wheelchair, drove in his van, and show up at the Stanislaus River. Perfectly good time, great weather, and a bunch of very nice people. First thing that happens is the person I went with, who I didn't know from Adam, his wheelchair breaks. And that's kind of a difficult situation when you're a quadriplegic. I have enough kind of general mechanical background. I was a cowboy raised in a cattle ranch. And so I was able to fix that. He thought that was pretty cool. And then later on, he lost his keys to his modified van. Couldn't find them anywhere. So that's where the other part comes in about being able to hotwire a car, and we'll leave that for a little bit later. So on this trip, it's an overnight, camping out and all those things you do. So that's the classic environment where, number one, you're having a good time. Number two, people get to know you with no pressure, and it's just a very natural way of interacting. At one point in the trip, as we're all, on the riverbank, swinging on a big rope swing into the river, I'm talking to this one guy, Danny. Danny says, so what do you do? He says, well, I'm in law school. He says, really? I'm a judge. I go, oh, okay. So, long story short, Judge Danny invites me down to come visit him in San Francisco. And while I was down there, he had me meet one of the higher-ups in the DA's office. Make a long story even shorter, I ended up working there for a summer and was offered a job by the district attorney, then Arlo Smith, after that. Turned out, didn't want to be in San Francisco, but great experience. So back to the guy in the wheelchair. He was the chief counsel, that's the lead attorney, for the State Department of Rehabilitation. And I found that out, after we were on the trip. And he was the guy that, okay, so here I fix his wheelchair. And then we'll get to the story of the keys. Well, we weren't going to get out of there without that van running, no keys. And even though I'd never hotwired a car before, I knew the basic premise of it and was able to actually get this thing started. And lo and behold, here we're going. Now, when you're hotwiring a car, you've got wire that you're kind of jerry-rigging. And if that wire falls off, the car stops. And I mean instantly. So here we are talking about a modified van for a quadriplegic with a power steering pump that's big enough to move a battleship, because it takes just very little hand motion. So if that engine stops, we were going to crash. That's all there is to it. We drove all the way back to Sacramento from the San Jose River near Sonora with this hot-wired vehicle. And had a good time at it. So after my first job, which was that very next summer in San Francisco, I was actually at the state legislature. The Friends of the River had a piece of legislation about increasing recreational opportunities about whitewater and people with disabilities. I was asked to testify and did. And in the audience, lo and behold, is the chief counsel from the Department of Rehabilitation waiting for another bill. And he stops me afterwards and says, hey, you seem to be able to handle yourself okay with a microphone. How'd you like to be on a state board? I said, oh, okay. So next thing I know, I'm in the governor's office being interviewed about my politics and basic outlook on life, and I would spend then 2 years as a member of the Department of Rehabilitation Appeals Board. And then after that, graduating from law school, well, a job opened up in the Department of Rehabilitation, and I happened to call in to talk to the chief counsel and said, hey, I heard you have a job opening. He said, would you like it? That was the extent of the interview. And not only did it come out of the blue, in fact, somebody else was about to be offered that job, literally in about 2 hours. And he found out that I was eligible to be taken off of state lists. And so he canceled that and offered the job to me. And why did he do that? Why did he like me? Well, this is a gentleman who was very political. He was part of the initial group of Ed Roberts and others who started the disability movement in terms of people with that type of disability. He told me flat out, he says, you're the first blind person I ever liked. He had had terrible experiences with the political situation about blind people having one agenda and people in wheelchairs having another, and not being able to come to any sort of coalition or common ground. And so if I had applied for a job with him without all that other background, it would have been absolutely fruitless. But he said, you know, you're a handy guy to have around. And he would tell that story. He'd tell it in some of the darndest places. You know, this guy, he can hot wire a car and fix your wheelchair, and I like having someone like that around. And that was the reason. Because he got to know me in that environment, and vice versa, and everything flowed from there. And everything, actually, in my legal career has flowed from that one river trip. It got me my start. I worked for the Department of Rehabilitation for several years because of the environment there. I was able and allowed to do many things. And that gets to part of what you talked already about being useful. There was a comment over here. Indispensable, that's too strong. I mean, I don't know anyone who starts thinking they're indispensable, it may be in for a rude surprise because nobody's indispensable, but useful. Now there's something we can deal with. And so I made myself useful, trying everything, and got my second job because among the candidates in a wish list that was a mile long, I was the only person that had even half of the background they wanted. And I had everything on the list. And it was just because I liked being useful. I liked saying, sure, I'll try that. And now having been a fill-in supervisor for a while, do you know what a pain it is when you go to someone to try to get something done, someone who's working for you, and what do you get instead of a, oh, sure? No, you get a, oh, I'm really busy. Oh, I've never done that before, and on and on. So that really is about all I have to say here and to relay is it is very important to know all the official job-seeking skills. But while you're doing that, have fun in life. Do things that are interesting. And what does that do? It gives you the obvious results. And it also, as in my case, can set you up for a lifelong career based upon being able to hotwire a car. So, questions at this point? Or Brian, I can go in any sort of direction at all.
Sure, let's open it for questions for a moment first.
You know, I've always been told it's deadly to be the first speaker after lunch. In a warm room, yes, this can't happen. But I will be here the rest of today through the evening. I'm going to be staying overnight. So I hope to be able to meet all of you. And otherwise, this has been very, very fun. And Brian, thank you very much for inviting me.
We actually have one question.
Oh, okay. You're welcome, yeah. Well, Brian, I have one question. I don't know if we're on schedule. Want to stay on there? You want me to spend you want me to tell them the Newsline story?
Yes.
Okay, so prior to the Newsline that we all now know and love, or at least some of us, there was a former Newsline system run just by the California chapter of the NFB. And it was a old technology, very basic kind of system, but it was the newspaper. And I hadn't been able to read a newspaper since I was in a car wreck when I was 18. And I really missed it. So all of a sudden, and I found out later that one night I woke up early, couldn't sleep, it was 5 in the morning, and I'm reading Newsline, and it just goes dead. And then I call back, and nothing. Call back a few minutes later, there's a recording. This service has been suspended due to lack of funding. I was the last person on Newsline. So I went around just kind of depressed for a while. It really depressed me. There's few things that really depressed me, as Brian can tell you. But that really did. Oh, I was just complaining about it. Someone in my van pool says, hey, well, you know, there's a new state librarian. I think he used to work for newspapers. Maybe he'd be interested in something. Sacramento is a fairly small town when it comes to being able to reach people. So I call up the head of the, the office of the state librarian and say, I'd like to have an appointment. And they say, sure. A week or two later, I go in and meet Kevin Starr. And I'm trying to explain to him what had happened, how much you missed the newspaper, and how it's just not the same to have someone read it to you. And he finally chuckled and said, well, what you wouldn't know about me is my father was blind. And I used to read the newspaper to him when I was a kid. And I didn't want to read any of the stuff he wanted to read. So I know just what you're talking about. Fast forward a little bit, being a lawyer and dealing with, excuse me, got a tickle here. Knowing how to do legislation, I actually wrote a piece of legislation that would make this part of the state library, and went through then 2 years of politics, backroom deals, scuttling. At one point, Governor Gray Davis vetoed the first legislation at the mysterious behest of unnamed persons, not realizing that at the last minute, because everyone thought the bill was supposed to go through, the entire disabled telecom program, Sunset, was canceled. And so it all died. So that was a little embarrassing. Went back, kept trying, kept looking around. Next year came up with a different approach that got everyone's support, and the bill went through. And it was nothing more than just going around and talking to some people and keeping and talking to people and finding out who's interested in your cause, building some coalitions, and that's now been in effect for 15 plus years and has survived budget cuts. It was at one point canceled by the then new governor Arnold Schwarzenegger's people because they didn't really know what they had killed, and there was a mix-up. So Kevin Starr, after whom the legislation was named, the Kevin Starr Access to Information Act, he calls Arnold and said, Arnold, what is this? You've killed this program for the blind, and go on. So Arnold said, I don't know anything about it. And Arnold went back, and there's a thing called the May Revise, which is where the governor takes whatever the most important things are that have come up since the budget was first introduced. There was like 20-some items in the entire May Revise, and Newsline was an entire page of that. So again, coalitions, who knows who, and just keep trying. So, okay. A question?
Yeah.
There we go.
So many of us, especially folks who live far off in the exurbs or in the country, have problems with transportation. And, Kim, you live out in, he's a really cool guy. He lives in cool California, not a big metropolis. You did something about that. You want to talk about that?
Well, this is kind of getting back to hot wiring cars. And actually, I don't live in cool. I live outside of cool. And where I am, at the time I moved up there 25 plus years ago, the nearest bus to get anywhere was 15 miles away. And it was 50 miles down to my office in Sacramento. Now, why we moved up there? Well, okay, I didn't say I was bright. So after trying other people's carpools for a while and not being very successful, I approached the group that I was riding on a space available basis and say, hey, how about if I buy a vehicle and you all take that? I said, sure. So since I was handy enough with cars, bought an old vehicle, fixed it up, and that launched it, and then traded that up to a van pool. And so for 25 years now, I've been running essentially a business where the van belongs to me, sits in my driveway, driver who starts a van comes there, so I get door-to-door service, and don't pay anything for it. And that also has all the contacts I was talking about, because without the contact in that van, there's that social interaction again. I wouldn't have even had the contact or idea about the state librarian, and Newsline would not have happened. So you can thank my van pool for Newsline, and I can thank a background of growing up on a cattle ranch and just learning a bunch of miscellaneous skills, and lo and behold, it comes up, and you never know. Anything else?
There were a couple questions.
More questions?
My mic is not.
Do you want to use this one?
Actually, I'll use your mic and then I'll bring it back to you. Okay, here we go.
Do you know anybody who's looking for a paralegal?
I'm going to bring it back.
Actually, the state of California, you can all hear me still without the mic?
There.
Well, okay, here we go. We're a very getting grayer by the day workforce with state government, so this is actually a very good time to be looking for jobs with the state because people are retiring and they're leaving. State service is getting pretty used to blind people. I was the first one in my office, I have a legal office of 85. Now we have 3 legally blind attorneys in a section of 12. So they both started after they worked there. They were fine before and developed eye problems later. So despite what you've heard, you can catch it. So any more questions?
More questions?
Are they hiring massage therapists? You do chair massages for these poor people that sit at the desk all day.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think it's a great idea. And actually, when I was a job developer, massage was one of my placements. And it was the place was not what you would call a mainstream therapy. What the heck, it was a massage parlor, I'm sorry. But it counted, it was a good job.
Okay, I've got a question back here. I'm coming.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. How did you end up hot wiring the car? I mean,
You mean, how did I do it, or why did I do it?
no. How did you end up doing it, and how did you manage to hold on to it for so long?
Yeah, right. Well, hot wiring a car involves getting a piece of wire, there's the wire part, and connecting 2 parts of the system so that you've got battery juice to the ignition, and that makes it hot. There's the hot wire. And then after you hook that up, it just sits there. The car hasn't started yet. And that's what you got to have nice and tight. So there was actually 2 handy little screws on the ignition switch. Now nowadays, wouldn't have been able to get to that at all. But back in those days, it's just hanging out. So got a little screwdriver from somewhere, and somebody got a pocket knife, and we stripped the wires and very carefully tied it around. And then you jumped the 2, so had another piece of wire to actually connect 2 other terminals, which then tells the starter to go, and that's how it works.
All right, I've got another question over here. Here we go.
All right. Tim, could you share some other entrepreneurial ventures that you have been involved in? And if you weren't a lawyer, what would you be doing?
Yeah, right. I forget the name for it. That's probably it. If I hadn't gone blind, I'd probably be a truck driver. Yeah, hot wiring trucks or driving trucks. If I hadn't been a lawyer, I really don't know, because I was a business major in school, so that was certainly it. And I actually had I actually had a great summer job that I got through one of my professors at college. Just asked around and said, "Hey, do you know anybody?" So that's actually the story there. But in terms of entrepreneurial things, no, I keep that to something I don't have to depend on for money, because when it gets down to it, I'm a weenie. And the people that can run their own businesses, I take my hat off to them, because that's a tough thing to do. It's a great thing if that's what you like to do. I don't have the guts to do it. So I'm a bad person to ask, but I sure admire anyone that does do that, and lots of blind folks have. It's been a very lucrative thing, and for blind lawyers, generally you either work for yourself or a large government agency, and there's not too many that are working in other than that. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial blind lawyers out there, and like I said, I take my hat off to them, and they're better than I am. Well, thank you all very much, and I'll be around here and talk to you later. As I was coming here, I was thinking, you know, what kind of lawyer am I? I didn't bring any cards with me. I will check, but I don't think so. So if anyone wants to get a hold of me, I can give you some contact information. Should I just give that here, or?
You know what, actually, and this is Kathy, what I was going to let you know is that after this, I'm going to be sending you a sheet that has the contact information
Perfect.
for everybody that's been speaking, including their home and cell phones. No, I'm just joking. No, so you'll get a sheet on everybody. So,
Well, again, thank you to Brian and to Kathy for inviting me, and I'll turn the microphone back over to her.
great, thanks a lot, Tim, appreciate it.